housing, on land use and zoning, tenant organizing, home ownership, and a lot of other things. Or if you're interested in DSA, which organizes around universal health care, which is more attainable than it has ever been before. Building power for workers, fighting the real causes of climate change, and defending the rights of women and immigrants and LGBTQ people. We have sign-ups going around the room, so just scribble your email on that and let us know what you're interested in, and we'll follow up with you after this is over. And also, if you're in DSA, would you mind raising your hand real quick? If anybody is interested in DSA, just have a conversation with one of those people. We're all super eager to talk about, socialism and about the various things that we're fighting for. So you shouldn't have any trouble, getting some information out of us. So I am going to go ahead and let Stephanie introduce herself for the most part, because she's got a pretty great handle on this topic. But we were very, very lucky to be able to have in our membership somebody who had authored a book on this very important topic. So we think that this is a great place to start with the Socialist Housing Education Initiative, because it's right at the beginning. So let's see. With that, I would like to introduce author and DSA Housing Committee co-chair, Steffi Webb.
Yes! Yes! I have the microphone, and you don't. Yet, unless you want to ask questions after I get done. So, I basically prime myself for being angry by seeing Green Book this weekend. Because, quite frankly, there is nothing better to describe just how much agency people of color don't have, other than seeing Green Book that's available to the public. Now you see what's going to really suck the cool right out of this is if the presentation that we worked so hard to get going doesn't show. Okay, I have to log in again. See, I knew it. I knew something would suck the cool out of it. You know what? That's okay. For many reasons, not least of which, I used to think cool was a bad word. Yeah, it's true. So, I'm fine with being lame. Therefore, it's okay that the cool was sucked out of it. Anyway, so, I'm Stephanie Webb, and I'm with an organization called Decipher City because on November 9th, 2016, one of my buddies, Jamie D'Angelo, and I said, we need to be activists. And we said, well, what kind of activists do we want to be? I don't do protests. People will hear that. I rarely do petitions, and I somewhat do letters. But what I really realized, and what Jamie realized, is that people need information to make choices. And we thought we would do our focus on the built environment, because quite frankly, what doesn't have to do with the built environment? The fact that this library was updated is, of course, based on the changing demographics. The fact that there is a very nice performing arts center that is right next door, that has to do with the changing demographics. Was this the historically black community? Yes, but for some reason, we didn't need that back when it was the historically black community for reasons. Therefore, we decided to name our book Not in the Plan, to basically say and demonstrate that the black community in the city of Austin was not in the plan. And we are going to cover, why do you keep making me look lame, man? What's going on? Thank you. So, first off, we're also live streaming this, so everybody who's at home gets to see me fumble over cords and press buttons. That's very important. But also, we will be having a question and answer session, and so if you have questions and you're watching through live stream, I will answer them, and I'll actually even see if I can read them on the microphone. So, basically, we're going to go through the double standards of planning. We're going to go through how we got all this information, and we're going to talk about the cliches of what people normally suggest for marginalized communities to do, and explain why they don't work. So, first and foremost, urban planning Does anybody know when urban planning started? Well, I do, but of course that's because I researched it. For those who don't know, in 1926, we started the Standardized Zoning Enabling Act. That was a federal act. That is what we said to basically say, oh, right, we can decide what is used where, zoning. And of course, when you talk about Austin's history, everybody likes to talk about the 1928 master plan, the master plan, 1928. Why did that get to happen? That happened because of the National Community Planning Enabling Act. And that was finalized in 1928, February, and the master plan in Austin was finalized in May 1928. Do not be confused. This was because people wanted to keep segregation. There actually was a Civil Rights Act back in 1866, but I thought that was 1964. No, 1866. But we did that fun thing that we like to do in the United States where we don't fund things that have to do with civil rights. Because, if it doesn't have any money, then it doesn't really count, right? It's the way we do things. So it was based on nothing. Therefore, city planning in this country, you can just say, oh, let's put things over there. You do not have to do research to decide where something goes. It is one of the few social sciences. Try studying crime without having any kind of knowledge of statistics or history. You really can't do that. Try studying psychology without having any knowledge of medical information. Well, you can, but you'd be a very bad psychologist. So, one thing I don't like to go into, slavery. But since Jamie's like, we have to go to slavery, here it is. It says slavery. That's the extent of my discussion on slavery. We all know that inequity in this country is based on the principle of slavery, which is why I don't like to start there. I feel like basically what everybody talks about with slavery is that, well, I didn't own any slaves, which kind of allows us to separate ourselves from inequity, and so we like to be socially responsible, therefore I don't like to dwell on it. But basically, from our fabulous book, Root Shock, which we actually did go into on our podcast, Jamie pulled this quote: if a medical device or drug is to be marketed, the Food and Drug Administration requires proof that the proposed treatments actually work and that they pose minimal risk to life and health. For public policy prescriptions, like planning, no such tests are required. Nearly any plausible sounding scheme can govern the fate of millions of people. And that's what happened. Basically, we had a bunch of bad governance that said, well, we don't like those people, so put them over there. Ooh, well, we want that land, so let's take it from over there. And that's literally how the city of Austin developed. And, one of the things that I find interesting is that despite the riots that were going on in the 1960s, which prompted the Kerner Report, we didn't have riots like that in Austin. Oh, we had protests. We had people, activists fighting for civil rights. But the reason we did not have the riots that occurred back then was largely because we had like 5 black people in the entire city. And one of the reasons why we have so little, we'll say, citywide mobilization around the black population is because it was small and it remains small. And one of the reasons that it remains small is, I don't want to act as if black people are a monolith, but I went to the black people meeting, and what we said was, we're only going to go to cities where we have an opportunity to have actual lives, i.e. cities where we can have jobs that make living wage, cities where we can own property, cities where our voices actually count. And so Austin has never really had a particularly good reputation among black people. It's funny, Whenever I tell people I'm from Austin, I tell a white person, they say, "That's so cool." I tell a black person, they say, "How is that?" And that is, in a nutshell, what people think about the city of Austin, Texas. And so what this book is largely about is people of color, largely black and Latino people, because there are so few Asian people as a group in the city of Austin that we couldn't even find in the city minutes, or basically anywhere, information about their activism as a whole. So if anybody wants to write a book about the Asian population in the city of Austin, please feel free. And Asian people, I'm talking to you. Because basically the way that things like the complete displacement of half the city happen is because people think that those people aren't there. So, how did this book start? Well, of course, I have all of these lovely little dates. How did I get these dates? Everybody has a lot of really easy answers for the black community. We basically say, "Oh, well, you should go to the meeting. You should vote. Yeah, you should meet with, insert name, staff member, and send an email and make a phone call and organize within your community, and you should talk to the media, and you should gather resources and file your suits." This book started with 2 words. Did they? And so that's how we kind of got on this rabbit hole. As everybody knows, in April 2017, the Task Force on Institutional Racism released its report saying, "Wow, there's racism in Austin," and they gave a timeline, and it was very, very vague. I can't tell you, as a social scientist, how irritating it is to see a timeline that says, in the 60s, this happened. That tells me nothing. And, in the 80s, this other thing happened. That does not help. So we looked at that timeline and I was like, well, Jamie, we've got to fill it in. So I actually went to the Carver Museum, which is right over there, and they had an exhibit called Juntos, which was an exhibit about activism with the Black and Latino communities. And I saw all these awesome pictures and all these awesome historical events, like the Juan Valdez Center that was torn down, unfortunately. And I said, "Oh, well, this information is great." And they said, "Well, we got it from the Benson Latin American Studies and Collection Center." And I was like, okay. So I went there to see if I could get more information. They said, well, actually, they collaborated with the Briscoe. So I went to the Dolph Briscoe Center for American Studies. I have to say, while universities are, of course, pretty elitist and pretty separated from the general population, I have enjoyed my entire life the fact that UT is a public university, which means they can't tell me to get out. I actually get to stay there as long as I want to. And so I went to the Briscoe Center and I found more information. And I was like, okay. And then I went to the Austin History Center. And they said, well, yes, here's this information, here's that information. But actually, what you need is to look at the city minutes and the city agendas. So if anybody goes to the City of Austin website, austintexas.gov, there is at the bottom a little link that says Public Records. And you go to that link, and it will allow you to search through terms with the city agenda meeting. So basically, this timeline, this short one, and the longer one that is actually included in the book, is a result of Stephanie having no monetary income, having a lot of time, and being really angry about planning in the city of Austin. Because when I tell you that it took literally 3 months to go through all of the dates and all of the mentions of the NAACP and El Concilio and MALDEF, I mean it took 3 months. And of course, the last month I was unemployed, so yay. But that is literally one of the reasons why it is difficult to find this information. Could we get all of the groups that are involved? Absolutely not. There have been so many groups that are involved in activism for East Austin, it's literally impossible. So basically, what we had in the city of Austin, and also the United States, but since we're in Austin, we're going to stay there, is a series of moves that basically screwed people of color, first and foremost black people. We had disinvestment in the black community, which was the result of that whole Negro district. They said put black people in East Austin, and then they didn't pay for libraries until 1933. That's when the little itty bitty building that is the Carver Genealogy Center was built. And they said, okay, well, we're not going to do drainage. People asked for things like lights, night lights, and they didn't get it. And so, come on, there we go. And so that was step one. Then urban renewal, cheap property. That was essentially what urban renewal was about. Cheap property because black people lived there. The Brookings Institute actually just published a study that said, hey, homes owned by black people were actually valued less than homes owned by white people. This is, the property brothers haven't come to the house yet. Nobody's trying to flip it. Same home, same floor plan. Owned by a white family, worth so much. Owned by a black family, worth less. So there's that devaluation. And then, of course, everybody realized, hey, you know, we like urban living. We like vertical mixed use. We like smart growth. Yeah, Kirk Watson, I'm talking to you. And so all of those neighborhoods that had been trying to create their community, had been trying to invest in those businesses that wanted improvements, well, forget them because we want people to pay more. And so with the arrivals of the techies in the 90s, we said, how do we make that happen in the city of Austin? And in 1999, January 14th, 1999, we had the new vision for East Austin, which was the first urban renewal plan in almost 30 years in the city of Austin. And that is what basically turned East Austin into what it is now. No disrespect to the techies, but basically people in West Austin didn't want to give up their homes. They didn't want their neighborhoods to be destroyed. So they said, oh, you know what? Let's designate East Austin as the desired development zone. To put it in perspective, urban renewal was part of the Federal Housing Act, which began in 1937. There are 1,880 mentions of urban renewal in Austin City Minutes. There are 4,281 mentions of the desired development zone, and that ordinance just turned 20 years on September 5th, 2017. So that is how aggressively developers and local government policies came after East Austin. Because basically, what's the thing about urban renewal? Urban renewal says, oh my gosh, it's dirty. It's dirty and it's unclean and it's unhelpful. And so they declare things as blight and they're slums. And so basically, this part of East Austin was declared to be slums. We've got to tear it down. We've got to rip it out. This is all the new building that occurs. That's occurred. And that's not even all of this, because this is the baseball field here. This is the baseball field there. We're in the middle of it, this fabulous facility, all of the upgrades you've seen, even East Side pies, and they are delicious. They are, of course, part of the new vision for East Austin. So, basically, they decided that, even though people were coming to the meetings, didn't matter. Even though people were doing all those things, it didn't matter. But I did want to explain. So, as we know, on January 31st of this year, even KUT was saying, well, does it matter if people go to the meetings? And one of the council members, won't say who he is, you can read the story if you want to, said, no, actually public testimony just solidifies what I was going to say otherwise. And of course, thank you, Texas legislative session. We just declared that it's no longer a crime for people to influence local politicians with money and meetings, all those little things that we're like, oh my gosh, how did they get Kirk Watson at the Austin Club and make all those choices? Well, basically, they just gave us the finger. Hooray! And to give you an example of just how much they gave people of color the finger, the NAACP was founded in 1909 nationally, but the Austin chapter was founded in 1919. They don't show up in the city meetings until 1966. Now, if you want to tell me that the blacktivists of the era that people were actually listening to didn't have anything to say during the Roaring '20s, the Great Depression, and both World Wars, I will tell you that beer is delicious, but don't drink it and then go speak in public. Because clearly, people of color were talking. They were, of course, not necessarily allowed to go to the meetings. Segregation is a very real thing. And, even LULAC, which was the Latino voting organization, they did not show up in the meeting minutes until 1946. Really? You think, the Latino people were like, yes, absolutely. Put industrial uses in our communities. We don't have anything to say about that. Until 1946, yeah, no, that's not real. And, there's also the question of who does the city council actually listen to and who do they just tolerate? Because Austin Neighborhood Council came into existence in 1973. Clarksville, Wheatsville Co-op and West Lynn and all those great places, that was only designated as the historical neighborhood in 1976. By the way, that was after the predominantly black population was no longer in Clarksville anymore. So basically, city council decides which activists it wants to listen to and which activists don't necessarily matter. And of course, there are consequences to that, and if you tried to buy a house in Clarksville, then you know those consequences. Voting. Voting is, of course, what we often want to say. When did voting get introduced in city council minutes? December 3rd, 1970. That's when the NAACP went to the meeting and said, hey, we're not getting enough representation. Of course, all of those groups had mentioned single member districts so that communities could actually be heard, because they're like, why is somebody over there deciding what happens over here? But we didn't have single member districts in the city of Austin until 2014. So basically, timing matters. And what happened in 2014? Well, I'll tell you what happened in 2014. That was when everybody finally started saying, oh my gosh, there are no black people in Austin. That is so weird. Aren't they supposed to be liberal? And then in 2015, that's when the Martin Prosperity Institute from Canada, Toronto, said Austin is the most segregated city in the United States. So the fact that we finally decided to have single member districts when all the black people were gone, that is very significant. For example, urban renewal. Go back to that for a second. The reason why we had the Urban Renewal Agency in 1959 was that property owners were the only people allowed to vote on whether or not we had an urban renewal agency. You'll never guess who didn't own property in the late 1950s in Austin. 3 guesses. No, you don't get that many. And so when you effectively put a poll tax like property ownership in the city, well, that means that, hey, yeah, now we need an urban renewal agency. And the Urban Renewal Commission actually still exists in the city of Austin. And if people were really, really interested in actually having the voters, we'd put that to a vote today. So, and of course, I mentioned the fact that Clarksville became designated as a nationally recognized registered historic community in 1976. We didn't even have a historical survey done in East Austin until 2016. Yep, 2016, 3 years ago. That's when we finally started saying, hey, I wonder if old stuff happened over here. That's when we put the money. So, by the way, here's where all the black people live. I live actually somewhere down there in the gray section with the Latino people, because that's, of course, we like to hang out because we're both poor and people don't want us in general. But this is the 2010 census of where black people are in the city of Austin. And remember, it was after this that we decided to do single member districts. Not depressed enough yet? Don't worry, there's more. Talk to city staff. Well, it's very nice that we had Philip, our assistant from the library, help us out, and that he's a POC. There are very, very, very few black people working for the city of Austin. In fact, planner-wise, I actually met the one black planner in the planning and zoning department at the League of Women Voters event 2 weeks ago. So it matters who's on staff, because quite frankly, if you've got the zoning person who goes to your church and goes to your grocery store, and if you've got the public works person whose kid goes to school with yours, you have more influence. That's just the way the world works. Because it's easier to say, oh, their area is garbage, to people that you don't know. That's one of the reasons why everybody works to make sure that people say, no, look, see here. I actually have a fellow activist friend who every day he takes pictures of kids at the borders and to remind everybody, your reason today why asylum should be legal, or why seeking asylum is legal. And so the fact that there are not nearly enough staff members of color in the city of Austin is one of the big reasons why organizations of color don't really have all that much influence over the city of Austin. I mean, quite frankly, most of them don't live in our neighborhood, and most of them don't know us. So it's easy to say, you know what, that's slum, that's blight. And so, that's why the inner city ordinance, yes, the inner city ordinance that protects East Austin, that protects West Austin, was designated in 1984. I hate that ordinance for many reasons, not least of which inner city was a term to denote black populations. The fact that they use it to protect a predominantly white wealthy community, I find absolutely disgusting. So, organize within one's community. This is the short list. This is the short itty bitty list of people that I looked up to make that really long timeline. There we go. League of United Latin American Citizens. These are the people who get Latino people out to vote, who basically support Latino candidates. Really, really, really old organization. National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. I put how many times the groups were mentioned in the history, both here and not in the plan, because I wanted to demonstrate just how small of an opportunity organizing within one's community gets heard by the city of Austin. Since 1919, 190 mentions of the NAACP. Brown Berets. Brown Berets were huge in the 1970s, and they were huge in the 1970s because they talked a lot about police brutality in the Latino community. They're only mentioned 25 times in city council. And of course, because they were very similar in nature to the Black Power, Black Panther movements, they weren't civilized enough, and so we don't really hear about the Brown Berets anymore. El Concilio is mentioned, but if you look at the city notes where El Concilio is mentioned, they're largely mentioned as hey, look, did you talk to Gavino Hernandez? And that's it. They didn't really talk to the people affected by zoning. So they mentioned the Urban League. Yes, that's because the Urban League helped to clear up blights and slums. But of course, even that organization, they stopped listening to. The Urban League these days is located off Rutherford and Cameron Road. Anybody know where that is? Well, let me tell you, there are two buses that go anywhere near those. That's the 10 and the 323. The 323 runs very infrequently, and the 10, But for drivers, that's near the intersection of 183 and Cameron Road. So that's what happens when people of color organize. They decide, maybe you're interesting, maybe we want to hear you, maybe we don't, maybe we decided you're angry. So that is one of the big reasons why when people are told, hey, you need to organize within your community, I'm like, well, it only matters if people listen to us. Talk to the media. Oh, did it? No, we don't want, go away, PDF architect. We don't want that. Thank you, Nick. Buy that software or don't, because they interrupted me. No. But talk to the media. These are pictures of organizing. This, one of the reasons why I love this picture, East Town Lake Citizens. Anybody remember the soccer field fiasco? How everybody was mad about the soccer field off Roy Guerrero Park? That is the first time since its inception in 1992 that SOS, Save Our Springs organization, has worked with an East Austin neighborhood organization. The entire time that they're trying to save our springs. Yes, we want to save the Barton Creek, Greenbelt, and Barton Springs, but we don't really have anything to say once we cross I-35. So, listening to people of color in the media is something the media actually has a real problem with. Perfect example. There was a protest for the Texas State Employees Union. I was holding one end of the sign. A white woman was holding the other end of the sign. The photographer came up to the white woman and said, what's your name? Why are you here? What's going on? What would you like to happen? And she answered, and I just watched all of this take place. And once he went away, I told her, there's somebody else on the other end of this sign. And she's like, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. So she then got his attention and said, oh, by the way, there's somebody else on the other end of the sign. I kid you not. He turns his back to me and says, was there something else you wanted to add, ma'am? So that's what happens when people of color talk to the media. People deliberately go out of their way to make sure that they don't hear our voices, which is why, yeah, that's right. We should basically deny children free breakfast. This was Community United Front back in the late 60s, early 70s, and where what they really wanted to do, because they were a Black Power organization, they wanted to do the dastardly deed of feeding children who had no food for breakfast, because, you know, that's what Black Panthers do. And so, but, you know, Larry Jackson, who is actually still alive and still active, was denied several times by city council. And the reason that they show that picture on UT is that, ironically, UT was the reason why that plan was allowed to happen. So that's Black people in the media. By the way, these photos are from the Briscoe Center. So if you want to see them, what they look like in person, go down to the Briscoe Center. They're very cool. They were very helpful. Take it to court. 1984. That was when the emergency ballot measure of single-member districts was put on the ballot for the city of Austin. Anybody who was here in 1984 and who was able to vote in 1984, because I wasn't, I was here, but I was like 3. This was the time that we actually could have had single-member districts in the city of Austin. And so NAACP sued, and still nothing. The federal court said, oh, that's fine. Plus, of course, when Black people go to court, people have certain perceptions of Black people. So us going in front of judges and us talking to lawyers, unless we are lawyers, and there actually are quite a few Black lawyers, largely because of activism, people just have this opinion, no, we're not going to listen to what you say. And recently, there have been studies that demonstrate that court reporters don't even understand what people speaking African American vernacular English are saying, as if we're not speaking English. It's very interesting in a not sort of way. One of the reasons why I had Jamie include this map, because I love it so much. This map is where crimes happen. Where crimes happen in the city of Austin. And if you look at this map of where crimes happen in this 2015 city of Austin, man, cops should be circling Circle C every single hour, because there are apparently so many thugs located in Southwest Austin. Good night, get it together, Northwood. But this is one of the reasons why Black people do not go to court, because we go to court and people ignore us. We go to court and people don't pay attention. There are other people who study crime. One of the reasons why Decipher City does not study crime statistics is because crime is the after effect. Crime is what happens at the end of the journey. The journey starts with a child is born and goes to school, lives in a neighborhood, lives on a street, goes to a grocery store. That's how it happens. What part of the built environment affects housing? All of it. How your toilet flushes, how the lights turn on, where internet access happens. That is where the story starts, not when somebody's behind a jail cell. So, basically, why don't these efforts matter? These efforts don't matter because they rely on assumptions. They rely on the assumption that all citizens are treated the same way. We know that all citizens are not treated the same way. It relies on the assumption that all of the concerns and issues for citizens in the city of Austin are treated as urgent, and we know that they're not. It relies on the assumption that local government staff members don't have their own incentives, biases, agendas, or that corporations like Amazon and Dell and AMD don't have any influence on the local government. It basically assumes that all of the major planning efforts are extremely transparent, and that everybody knows everything that happens. Raise your hand if you've been to an environmental commission meeting. Yeah, that's right. What's it, fewer than 10? And which doesn't mean that we're not involved. It just means that that's the way local government works. It works for who it wants to work for. And it acts as if community activism is definitively going to change what happens. Anybody remember what happened when Zydeco Development Company called East Austin Tortilla Canyon? And Mayor Adler was so mad, and Representative Eddie Lopez was so mad. Did Zydeco Development Company lose that contract bid? No, they sure didn't. Everybody was organized. Everybody was mad. Didn't matter. They still got the contract. So, what we say is, when you realize that you're telling somebody to go to a meeting, recognize that the only reason that the meetings are even happening is because we have a state act that's the Open Meetings Act. They are doing this because they are checking off a list. They're not doing this because they actually want to hear their citizenry. Look for people who aren't being heard. Try and make connections when you go to those meetings. That's what they're for. They're for networking. That's what people with means use it for. We can do that too. When you're telling people to vote, make sure that they know where their voting location is. Make sure that they're registered to vote. Homeless people actually can vote, which I say not to diminish the struggles of homelessness, but because there are ways. You just have to be made aware of it. So if you find organizations that assist the homeless, talk to them about enabling the homeless voting population. If the media is going to talk to you, even though a black chick is on the other end of the sign, make sure that you direct their attention to the people of color, because the media, of course, is trained to talk to predominantly white populations. That doesn't mean that nobody has anything to say. That just means that that's what they know. So make sure that we're directing people at people who aren't us. If you've got staff members who are willing to meet with you, unless you're part of an organization that's going to help inequity, don't talk to them off hours. Because basically, if everybody can't talk to the staff members off hours, if everybody doesn't have access to the people who make the policy decisions, make sure that you're engaging them in a professional circumstance. So to basically hold them accountable and say, hey, look, you just talked to this organization. They want to know what's going on. Don't be like this weird guy who said, yeah, Google can do whatever they want to. I literally looked at this fool and said, but why? And he didn't have anything to say to that. And when you tell people to organize within their community, make sure you know what organizations are within their community. And spread the word around so that people actually know what's going on. And most importantly, accept that easy answers do not work with populations of color. It doesn't. Telling us to change our resume does not get us higher paying jobs. Telling us to put on nice clothing does not put us in the apartment. The dominant narrative is that we are different. Make sure that you respect those differences, and maybe, just maybe, we'll be able to get Austin on track. By the way, what are these dots on this map? These are air pollutants. These are known source pollutants. And these are the black people. So with that being said, yes, anybody who's not surprised is probably an activist. Oh wait, it's this entire room. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody have any questions? Yes?
I'm really done asking this, but what's the significance of single-member districts?
I was asked, what is the significance of single-member districts? The significance of single-member districts means that instead of everybody voting on all decisions for the city of Austin, only people located within certain districts get to make those decisions. For example, I was doing It's My Park Day, and I live in District 3. And my district representative is Delia Garza. I saw Delia Garza at the park helping clean up because I live in District 3. So that means that Delia Garza lives near, and she walked over, which means she didn't drive. She's not, coming from here playing on her smarty phone or whatever. She actually knows the community. She knows some of the issues of her constituents, and that's the purpose of single-member districts. People actually wanted it to be 12 districts instead of 10, but it's easier to say 10 instead of 12. Or whatever stupid reason they use to make it 10 instead of 12. So it's proximity and intimacy. That's the reason why single-member districts matter. Any other questions? Yes, Colin.
So, obviously there's a tremendous number of hurdles, and city, state, and federal are very good at ignoring the voices that they want to. What kind of tactics work, in your opinion, or from your studies?
So what I've noticed is that the more you have poor people, poor unemployed people, all those educated people who can't get jobs because they majored in underwater basket weaving, or at least that's what they're being told, putting out information, that's what helps. The more information we have, the better we can say, wow, why are you making this happen this way? Why did San Francisco just work to expunge arrest records for people with marijuana charges? Because they had all this information about, well, wait a minute, why are black people going to jail for it? Thank you, Michelle Alexander with the new Jim Crow. And getting that information out there, getting the information and getting that information out there. One of the nice things about there being different kinds of activists, including people who knock on doors and do the marching and sit in front of Facebook way too long, is that's how we disseminate the information, so that the people who are good at the door knocking and giving speeches like this and so forth can make that happen. Because I was on my way here, I was talking to my dad about memes, and he hates memes. He hates memes. But what is nice about memes is that they generally encourage people who are good at finding the information. We say, really, is that true? And then we work to put together projects to make that happen. So basically a lot of collaboration between people who are good at getting information and people who are good at getting information out there. That's what I find is helpful. That's one of the reasons why I will finally say yay Bernie, because he was the only Democratic senator to support Ilhan Omar when everybody's trying to throw her under the bus. That was a very good collaborative move, and it demonstrates, because everybody has already finally been made aware that Israel and Judaism are two different things. And so that's what I find is most effective. Communication skills. Other questions? Yes, Jim.
Stephanie, so the city put together these neighborhood planning groups back in the 90s, maybe?
Yes.
Early in the century, maybe. I can't remember exactly when they came together.
It was the 90s, you are correct.
Was it the 90s? And this seemingly represented an opportunity for neighborhoods to democratic participation in city zoning decisions. How do you think that worked out?
Well, it depends on what neighborhood you're talking about, because in 1980, Robertson Hill had... Oh, yes. So we had neighborhood organizations, and in 1990 we did say, hey, we want to listen to neighborhood organizations, sort of. And so and so my response to did that work and where are we now is that in 1980, when we didn't have neighborhood organizations, Robertson Hill, which is up near 787, it's near University Hills. It's like just below University Hills, which is 78723, so 78722. They were able to get a 180-day moratorium from development. Whereas when Save Our Springs came into existence in 1992, they were in January 1992, they were able to get an ordinance passed as of May 1992, the Save Our Springs ordinance, and they went one better and did the Edwards Aquifer Authority as of 1993 during the legislative session. So it depends on what neighborhood you're in, because, you know, nobody got the Boggy Creek authority passed, and nobody got the Boggy Creek ordinance passed, where we protect housing around Boggy Creek. But you know, that's over there. So it really does depend on which neighborhood organization it is. That's who the city council decides to listen to. Yes.
I think that was a good question and a good answer. And as someone who has seen a lot of the major housing and affordable housing activism play out, so many of the orgs just really lack people of color. And how do you think, you know, whether it's FAN or Aura or some of these larger groups that focus specifically on like housing, are there any people of color led organizations that are focused besides Deciphered Cities, which I want to know more about, but that are led by people of color? And can you, like, do you have any recommendations about how to merge the two together better? Because it feels like they're like speaking different languages and talking different. I don't know. I don't see any collaboration.
No, it's true. So some of the organizations that she's talking about include Austin Neighborhood Council and Friends of Austin Neighborhoods, because I met Roger Cavin, who's a big neighborhood activist. No. I point to emphasize things. So I just look very much like I'm into disco, but I was born after that, so can't be. But in all seriousness, the challenge, of course, is perspectives, right? If the perspective is that these community members matter, but we're going to put everything over there, and by there I mean East Austin, then it becomes harder to collaborate. Or remember, there's a lot of bad blood right now because of what Austin Neighborhood Council helped inspire. And Friends of Austin Neighborhood didn't exist until like 5 years ago, so can't really put the blame on them. But there is a lot of bad blood with West Austin neighborhood organizations and East Austin organizations. What is starting to happen is basically people are going to sessions like these and going back to their neighborhood organizations, and they're actually learning, oh my gosh, in November 2017, Robin Wright of Save Our Springs Ordinance finally apologized and said, we did not know that East Austin was just going to be decimated by the Save Our Springs Ordinance. We did not know that that community was going to be destroyed, and we deeply, deeply apologize for that, because that, yes, was out of line. So that's what's generally happening right now with the organizations. Housing doesn't have nearly as many groups on it because housing is complicated. I mean, anybody know what a PUD is? Yeah, that's right. And that's because we're the housing people. People know what ADUs are? Yeah, that's right. We got all the acronyms. It's great. And Google is available, but unless you have maps and things to put it in perspective, people don't know what you're talking about. And let me tell you, the way I described reading those city minutes to find the mentions is like chewing glass. It really is. It's very boring. And people are counting on it being very boring, which is why all of this information happens. Decipher City is actually just two people. It's me and it's Jamie. And literally what we do is we form collaborations with groups, and that's how we help get information out there. That's basically when people have the information, they make better choices. League of Women Voters, who I spoke to a couple of weeks ago, they were ecstatic because, of course, League of Women Voters is on the lawsuit. Yes, accomplices leveraging your privilege. The lawsuit against the Secretary of State for the bias and the prejudice and the just disgusting racism exhibited in saying, let's purge these 95,000 voters because their last name is Martinez. So that's what's happening. Basically, a lot of bad blood is being dealt with, and people are learning to collaborate and do what needs doing. Yes, Seneca.
Yeah, so one thing I've been doing recently with some other orgs is doing these like trainings on how to advocate at City Hall and other things. And like it's kind of hard because I can describe the mechanics, but the people that I'm usually teaching, which are primarily in District 4, where most people do not look like me, is the likelihood is that the first time that they go to City Council, they're not going to have the same set of positive experiences. Realistically, I describe the reality of their influence. Like, the less likely it is that they'll actually go and do the thing and learn how to do the thing and so on.
Well, and so basically what Seneca is mentioning is that when people actually understand the effects of speaking in front of City Council, they're like, well, screw it, why am I even going? And that's true to a point, except for the fact that we have wonderful, wonderful social media that makes sure that all the information is getting out there. That's why I share things that you send on your page. It's why why we actually have a lot of social media activists, in addition to the boots on the ground, to make sure that, if that city council member didn't hear about it, then we're going to spread this viral thing that explains exactly what happened when Bob went to the meeting. It's one of the reasons why Love Paul Saldana, who's on AISD, whenever something happens that's atrocious with AISD, i.e. once every 2 hours, he writes a very long post saying, oh my gosh, like, really, y'all? And he explains why he's saying that everybody shares. Education deserts are one of the things that we're talking about now. With school closures and school funding. And again, that's that whole collaboration. People who have the information, people who are getting it. And when I say people who are getting it, we do need boots on the ground. We do need social media. It is definitely fun to not be on it. It's one of the reasons why I do endurance sports, so that people still like me. But basically, there's a lot of information, and basically making sure that people know that just because they don't talk to the Delia Garza or Greg Kassar, or back in the day, or Houston, as if it was like forever ago, it was just like 2 months ago, back in the day, or Houston, doesn't mean that people aren't going to hear what they have to say. And people are actually working on making sure that people hear what people have to say. Do we have any questions coming from online?
No.
Okay, cool. Yes, Nate.
My question comes from the last map you showed.
Yes.
With the air balloons.
Yes.
Like kind of overlaid over the different areas of the city.
Yes.
Having just moved from Houston, down there there's TEJAS, which is Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy and Services. Their main page is bilingual, and that's their main thing is middle to lower income folks, usually Hispanic, because that's where all of our industry in Houston is usually pushed to. What do you think there's either a lot of potential, or is there work being done right now on the cross-section of environmental racism and then housing as well? Anything here in Houston? Or in Austin?
This is where, see, we actually have a podcast on this. There was an awesome lady named Dorsetta Taylor who wrote a book called Toxic Communities. And again, that author's name is Dorsetta Taylor, Dorcetta, Taylor like Jim Taylor. And she wrote a book called Toxic Communities. And she basically talked about all of the public policies that have affected environmental pollutants in marginalized communities. And the reason why we did our presentation the way we did it, I know that it's just me up here, but Jamie helped me, so I'm not like speaking in the royal we. The reason why we did our presentation the way we did it, where we went through examples and then mentioned why they didn't work, is because that's what she did. In the city of Austin, major environmental advocacy group, PODARE, people protecting Earth's resources. I don't remember what the O and the D stand for, but I know that it's people protecting Earth's resources. And that is what they do. That is how they deal with environmental racism. We are, and we're constantly looking for more groups. There's a book that I'm reading right now called Clean and White. Basically, all of this nonsense about people of color being dirty and disgusting, that happened back during slavery. And that was basically started by Thomas Jefferson, who of course had Enlightenment ideals while being a slaveholder, which was very interesting in an annoying and disgusting kind of way. A lot of research is fortunately being done with environmental racism and housing, because what was the major trick of zoning? It put industrial uses in neighborhoods of color. That was the whole point, because they didn't want wastewater treatment plants. They didn't want power plants. If you're in the city of Austin, you remember the battle to shut down Holly Power Plant. They didn't want those in the predominantly white communities or the wealthy communities, which in the city of Austin is the same thing. They wanted them where people didn't have to think about it. They wanted the landfills where people didn't have to think about it. And so now bunch more research, bunch more groups are finally getting it together to say, hey, it's not just, white people are not the only environmentalist movements. And a lot of environmental activists we've talked to have said, yeah, we're basically figuring that we've got to burn the movement to the ground and build it back up with people of color this time. So yay, making headway. Yes, Sylvie.
So I heard something about from you about training people of color to be better advocates, but then I'm not sure what exactly the better advocates or be more listened to or be able to communicate their issues more effectively. But what about training city hall people to listen to people of color and not react to emotion and pain as something that's messed up and needs to be thrown out?
So the question that Solveig asked, because we want to make sure this is live streamed, is how do we train local government officials to actually listen to people of color? Well, at the risk of saying a cliche, we make sure we get the ones who do. And we make sure that when we don't get the ones who listen to people of color, that they are really, really embarrassed about it. One of that is, and we basically make their movements tied to them. For example, one of the things that needs to happen is people going to the meetings and reporting on what happens at those meetings. Because if anybody knows anything about city council, it goes to something like this. They have a really long agenda most of the time. That agenda is like 20 to 25 pages. There's no way on this green earth that we go through 20 to 25 pages. So what happens is they say, all right, we want to have this, and they go down a list and they say, motion to vote on this, and they go and they clear about 15 of those pages with one vote. They decide which votes are heard, where they take public testimony, and then if they decide not to take public testimony, that's it. There's your community building gone because they didn't want to listen to it. We've basically got to tweak the Open Meetings Act so that crap like that can't happen. We've got to change our ordinances so that crap like that can't happen. That's why I'm very glad that there are lawyers involved in activism, because they know how to make the rules and make it in the legalese that is deliberately elitist, so that they can't, so that everybody actually gets heard. That's the thing. Got to tweak the system. Steph, don't mention your anarchism in front of this. Okay, I won't. Any other questions? Yes, Mark.
We could go back to small area planning just for a moment, if you could address like the audit.
Yes.
The audit of the neighborhood planning contact team.
Oh, you mean the audit of the Neighborhood Housing and Community Development Team in 2014 that said they did a rubbish job of determining what is affordable housing? Why, yes, Mark, I would be more than happy to mention that. So, what's another issue with local government? They plan very badly. And the reason why they plan very badly is because they are based on what was before. They are based on who they give tax incentives to. And so if they are taken out to lunch by Peloton, well, of course we're going to build the Monarch. If they're being given tickets to the